So we'll begin in Leviticus 23. I looked back, and several of my trumpet messages in the past have focused here, but I'm going to come back to something I said I eventually would talk about in 2019. So I was looking at all my trumpet messages, and in 2019 I said, this is a really important point, and we should cover it at some point. And then I went and did something else. So finally, I came back to it after a few years. But Leviticus 23, we know this well. It says, "Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, saying, In the 7th month, on the 1st day of the month, you shall have a Sabbath rest." Right? This is where we're here today. A memorial of blowing of trumpets, a holy convocation. Of course, then it goes on and it says, "You shall do no customary work on it. You shall offer an offering made by fire to the Lord." When you look at the Old Testament, and as Mr. Slocum said, when you start to understand the full meaning of trumpets, it starts to explode all the things that you could go focus on, all the areas and aspects that you can look at, both the very high level and also drilling in. But when you look at the Old Testament, the Feast of Trumpets is, I would say, actually the second least explained holy day. The 8th is, of course, the least explained, because it's just, there's an 8th day, it's there. But this day, there's not much explanation about what we are to do. And I think there's a reason, because it centers us on a very important point that I hope to go through today. Numbers 29, verse 1, is kind of another place that it talks about. And it says, "For to you it is a day of blowing of the trumpets." Right? So this focus on trumpets, blowing of trumpets. And I've mentioned this several times in the past, but of course this word trumpets might not be the most accurately translated. It comes from a Hebrew word, teruah, which is is H8643. And it means clamor, an acclamation of joy or a battle cry. Now think about that juxtaposition. This can be a word that means joy, happiness, you're excited, or it can be a battle cry. It can be an alarm, something that should worry you. Like, there's probably not too many things that are as opposite of those two things, but this word can mean either one of those. And it goes on in Strong's, and it says, especially a clangor of trumpets. So, of course, this is where we get the shofar, the blowing of the shofar from, and the Jewish people traditionally associate this day with the blowing of the shofar. It can go on and mean alarm, joy, jubilee, loud noise, rejoicing, shouting. So very, very different words. And when you look, the primitive root of this word is ruah. So instead of teruah, it's ruah. And it means a blowing of alarm, cry, joy, shout for joy. So there's this very mixed message in this word. And you can think about this. This is the focus of this day, the teruah. And even in here where it says in Leviticus 23, blowing of trumpets, it's actually just one word, teruah. There's no actual, multiple words in this. We just translate it as blowing of trumpets. And I want to pause here for a second, because trumpets is one of those words that between English and Hebrew is, I think, very confusing. It took me a long time. I had to really sit down and I've studied this a number of times, and every time I go back, really remind myself, because there's 5 words in the Hebrew that are translated as trumpets in English, and those 5 words are translated as other things in a lot of other cases. So it's not a lot of consistency in how it's translated. But there's 4 words, and we'll just go through them quickly. We talked about teruah, and think about this as really the noise that's coming out. So this word is more about the noise versus the instrument. There's another one, H3104, and it's yobal. And this, again, is more about the noise. So the definition is the blast of a horn. So it's very specific. It's coming out of an instrument, but it's more about the noise than it is about the instrument itself. And this is actually often translated as jubilee. So when you read the word jubilee, it's actually normally translated this yobal. Not all the time, though. So again, not very, can be confusing. But 21 times it's jubal. not Jubal, Jubilee, and then 5 times ram's horn. And those 5 times are in the Battle of Jericho. So Joshua fought the Battle of Jericho. It's used as it's translated as ram's horn. The next one is probably the one we would most commonly associate with trumpets. It's Hebrews H7782 shofar, right? That's of course when we think about the word trumpet, probably as you mentally are reading the word trumpets in any of the or trumpets in the Old Testament, that's probably the picture that comes into your mind most often, or at least it's mine. I don't know if it's yours, but it's mine. And it's a curved horn, right? It's a ram's horn. It's some type of animal horn. So it's something that God created, you could say, right? And of course, man shapes it, but it's a curved horn. And the interesting thing here is the root of the word means beautiful, beautiful. So the root of shofar is actually beautiful. Then the next one, I will butcher I probably butcher all of them, but I'll really butcher this one. Hatz O Tafar, and it's H2689, and it means a trumpet. But the instrument, so again, the shofar is about the instrument, but it's a curved horn. It's a natural horn. This trumpet is something that indicates something man has made. So the trumpet that probably is most commonly associated with this word is the 2 silver trumpets that God commands Moses to make, and is used to tell the tribes of Israel how to go when they want to move about, when there's war, those kind of things. So this word is about a physically made or man-made trumpet, often these 2 silver trumpets. And then there's one usage of the next one, which is H8619 Ta Koha. And it's used only once in the book of Ezekiel. So just once. So, if you want to find that one, you can go look at it, but it's used just once. So we have these five words. We have teruah, which is more about the sound that's being made, and it can be this sound of alarm or the sound of joy. We have yobal, which is this blast from a horn, generally the most closely associated with the trumpets or the silver trumpets, but it's really a command. So when it's blown, you're giving a command that's to be followed. Shofar, of course, the God-made horn that man shapes, and the root is beautiful or fair. The next one is about the silver trumpets, and then this last one that's used just once. And so whenever you read the word trumpets, if you really want to understand what's going on, you always have to go back, because these words, as I said, are translated in lots of different ways, but all of them throughout the Old Testament are translated at least once as trumpet. So kind of want to pause there so we center ourselves around these things. But today what I want to explore is not just that this is a day of blowing of trumpets, but in Leviticus 23, God tells us that it's a memorial. It's something that we are to remember. So the Hebrew word literally means a memento, right? So think about this. God gave us this one day a year that's supposed to be a memento, right? Like if you carry around a memento for something that you want to remember, what does it do? It recalls you to a specific event. It recalls you to something that's probably very important in your life. Probably generally you're not carrying around something where it's not very important. It's something that's going to be important, and we're called to remember this event, right? And it has to be then associated with this teruah, this loud noise. Again, often teruah is associated with the blast of a shofar, but it just means this loud noise. So we're called to remember something today. Called to remember. Now, this memorial can actually be something both in the past and in the future. So it doesn't have to be something that's just in the past, but we're called to remember something today. So that's what I want to look at. What are we called to remember? And again, as you look at the full meaning of this day, you could go in any number of ways. But for the Israelites, and I think for us today, God does center us on one key thing that we are to remember, that we're supposed to think on, and we're supposed to get excited about. So a good place to start looking at this event then would be in these 5 words, right? So these 5 words that are all kind of associated together. So when we look at the first one, Teruah, the one we is specifically about this day, the first place it shows up is Leviticus 23:24. First time it's seen in the Bible. So that probably is not the thing we're supposed to remember, right? It's kind of hard to say, remember today, because you're supposed to remember today. But what is this event? If you look at Ruah, so this is kind of the root of Teruah, it doesn't show up until the book of Numbers, so after Leviticus. So that's probably not, pointing us to the event that we're supposed to remember. The next one, the one that I would butcher bad, so I only did that once, the 2 silver trumpets. First time that's talked about is the book of Numbers, when Moses is told to make the 2 silver trumpets. Takah, as I said, only used once in the book of Ezekiel, so not something that the Israelites would have been able to remember. But both Yobel and Shofar show up in the same story, a story that's actually not too far in the past of the giving of the holy days. And so if you turn to Exodus 19, and we'll begin in verse 13, we can see the usage of these words of shofar and kabal. In Exodus 19, verse 13, it says, "Not a hand shall touch him, but he shall surely be stoned or shot with an arrow, whether man or beast he shall not live. When the trumpet," and this is Yobal, "sounds long, they shall come near the mountain." Now, of course, I picked it up right in the middle of a story we're probably all familiar with, because this is the story of Mount Sinai, giving of the law. And it goes on and it says, "So Moses went down from the mountain to the people and sanctified the people, and they washed their clothes. And he said to them, 'Be ready for the 3rd day. Do not come near, be ready for the 3rd day. Do not come near your wives.' Then it came to pass on the 3rd day in the morning that there were thunderings and lightnings and a thick cloud on the mountain, and the sound of a trumpet." So this is shofar. "The sound of a trumpet was very loud, so that all the people who were in the camp trembled." Now, think about this. I think we estimate somewhere about 3 million people. I should have looked that up, but 3 million people came out of Egypt. And there's in a camp out in front of this mountain. Now, 3 million people, that's a lot of people. I don't know how many people have been to an outdoor concert or something, but, maybe it's 1,000. I don't know. I've got the biggest one, 10,000, 100,000, way less than 3 million people. And yet, the sound of this trumpet was so loud that the 3 million people didn't just hear it. They trembled at the sound of this shofar. Think about how loud that had to be for 3 million people to tremble at the sound of the shofar. Verse 17, "And Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain." Now, Mount Sinai was completely in smoke. Again, really put yourself into this situation. So you have this mountain. This isn't just, a little hill. It probably is not like our Cascades or Mount Rainier, but it's not a small mountain. It's a big one. And it's completely encased in clouds. And the sound of a trumpet is so loud that it's making 3 million people tremble. Now, I have some curiosity here on how God did this, because we're like the people in the front really getting it, and so they were getting like shock waves, versus the back might have been a little bit less, but they were still trembling, or did he kind of even it out? I don't know. I have questions. We'll hopefully be able to get those answered at some point. But it says now Mount Sinai was completely in smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in a fire. Its smoke ascended like the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mountain quaked greatly. So now you have fire and smoke and the sound of a shofar. And we heard the sound of a shofar. It's not a trumpet blast. There can be some eeriness in it, right? It's a very deep, can be eerie sound. And now the whole mountain is quaking. I don't know if it's the mountain quaking because of the sound that caused them to tremble. Again, I have a lot of questions, but you can imagine the scene. And it says, and when the blast of the trumpet sounded long and became louder and louder. So now it was loud, so loud it caused them to tremble, and it got louder and louder. So you could imagine this building up of this sound of the trumpet. Moses spoke, and God answered him by voice. And then we know you go on in verse 20, and what happens? The giving of the 10 commandments. And then at the end of the giving of the 10 commandments in Exodus 20, verse 18, it says, now all the people witnessed the thunderings, the lightning flashes, the sound of the trumpet. Again, shofar in this case, the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they trembled and stood afar off. Now, partly they trembled because the shofar, the sound of the shofar was so loud it caused them to tremble. And then it goes on, and then they said to Moses, you speak with us, and we will hear you, but let not God speak with us, lest we die. And Moses said to the people, do not fear, for God has come to test you, that his fear may be before you, so that you may not sin. So the people stood afar off, but Moses drew near the thick darkness where God was. And so it might be tempting to stop here and say, the giving of the law, the 10 commandments, that was the really important event that God might want us to recall. Of course, the 10 commandments are very important, right? They give us the sense of God's way of life, right? This is the 10 things that he says, if you don't remember anything else, remember these 10 things. So these are very important, but I'm not sure that that's what God is pointing us to. I want to back up a little bit earlier in verse 19. Again, I jumped right into the story right as the kobal and the shofars and all the noises were happening. But if you go back to verse 19, there was a purpose that God had called the people to be there. Exodus 19, verse 3, it says, and Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain, saying, thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians, how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be a special treasure to me above all people, for all the earth is mine. In verse 6, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words which you are to speak to the children of Israel. So Moses came and called for the elders of the people and laid before them all the words that the Lord commanded him. And then all the people answered together and said, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. So Moses brought back the words of the people to the Lord. So we can see that God actually called the children of Israel to Mount Sinai for a purpose. And yes, as part of the purpose was the giving of the 10 commandments, but that wasn't the purpose. That was how he delivered his purpose. The purpose was to have a covenant, to create a covenant between him and the children of Israel. We've talked about this in the past, and it's very much tied to this concept of pistis or faith, where you pledge allegiance to the king. But the Expositor's Bible Commentary points out that this covenant at Sinai fits this model that was very common in the Middle East at this time of a covenant, a suzerain vassal covenant, where you would have a king that would come and he would declare himself over a nation and say, I'm your king, I will protect you, I will do these sets of things, and then you will be my people. And in this covenant, I think the Lord is declaring something that might easily be lost because it's not explicit. If you reread Exodus 19, verse 6, it says, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Now, if Israel is to be the Lord, to be to the Lord a kingdom of priests, what's the Lord declaring himself to be? What's the Lord declaring himself to be? A king. Imagine, Mr. Slocum talked about pivotal moments that are to come, and we'll hopefully tie this into that. But think about this as a pivotal moment in the relationship between the Lord and Israel. He's declaring himself the King of Israel. He's saying, you're to be a kingdom of priests, a holy nation to me. He's creating them as this kingdom, and he's setting himself up as the king. He's declaring himself as the king. If you think then some amount of time later, when now Moses is writing in the book of Leviticus and God is giving them the laws associated with the holy days, and God comes to them and says, I want you to remember this loud noise that can mean both joy and alarm. What might they recall? This loud noise that happened at Mount Sinai, this covenant that they had entered into, but more importantly, the fact that the Lord was declaring himself their king. He was saying, not only am I your God, I am your king. You're going to be unlike any other nation around. You're going to be this special people. Here I would put to you that the thing that God wanted the Israelites to recall on this day, when the blowing of the trumpets, the teruah, happened, he wanted them to remember their feelings on that day when they were before him on Mount Sinai. He wanted them to remember not just the covenant, but the fact that he was making himself king. He was declaring himself king. And we know at the time when kings were announced, how were they announced? They were announced with loud noises, with the blowing of trumpets. So you could imagine that this whole experience in Mount Sinai was God, or the Lord, coming and declaring himself with these loud noises that made 3 million people tremble, noises and fire and cloud and smoke that covered a mountain. He was declaring himself king in a very pivotal moment. And what did the people of Israel say? They said, yes, we'll enter into this covenant with you. Again, a very pivotal moment for the nation of Israel. Because what if they would have said, no, we don't want to be part of this covenant? It would have changed the course of the history of Israel. But let's look a little bit deeper in some other places that tie together teruah and the declaration of the Lord as king. Because there's others. This isn't the only one. And again, as I said at the beginning, I would invite you to go do a study of these 5 words, or really the 4. The one's pretty quick because it's only one, but these 5 words that mean trumpets, because you can see this pattern that's happening. Again, they're in a lot of the most important stories, or the stories that we most recognize in the Old Testament. As I said, look at Joshua and the Battle of Jericho. These words come up time and time again in other places, but one of the places that comes up very frequently is the book of Psalms, the Psalms. These 4 words, and again, it can be kind of hard because a lot of them are translated as trumpets in the book of Psalms, but they're also translated other words, so you really have to dig in and look. But there's lots of Psalms that tie this together. Today, I just want to look at one. So if you turn to Psalms 47 and verse 1, this, as I said, is one of several that are like this. But if you go there to Psalms 47 verse 1, and you look at the heading that it gives. Actually, just Finn and I had this discussion. The headings are not in the Bible, so now he knows this. But what does the heading says? Praise to God, the ruler of the earth. It says, "Oh, clap your hands, all you people. Shout." This word shout is ruah, the root of teruah that is called today. It says, shout to God with the voice of triumph, for the Lord Most High is awesome. Now, notice this next one. He is a great king over all the earth. Right? He's being declared a king. He will subdue the peoples under us and the nations under our feet. He will choose our inheritance for us, the excellence of Jacob, whom he loves. God has gone up with a shout, teruah, the Lord with the sound of a trumpet, shofar. Sing praises to God, sing praises to our King. Sing praises, for God is King of all the earth. Sing praises with understanding. God reigns over the nations. He sits on his holy throne. The princes of the people have gathered together. The people of the God of Abraham, for the shields of the earth belong to God. He is greatly exalted. It sends shivers up your spine, doesn't it? We're to rejoice. We're to exalt. We're to praise this King. And Mount Sinai was effectively his announcement. That's where he announced, or he started the announcement to the whole world that he is King. That's keep coming back. What are we to remember? This loud noise. What loud noise are we to remember? The announcement of Jesus Christ as King over the whole earth. Started with Israel, then came to us, and it's going to come to the whole earth. One more place that I want to turn to, if you go to Hebrews, this is immediately after the faith chapter, where, the writer of the book of Hebrews goes through and talks about all the faith that was shown by those that we've read so much about. But here in Hebrews 12, verse 18, it says, "For you have not come to the mountain that may not be touched." Now, what was that mountain that may not be touched? Mount Sinai. "And that burned with fire and blackness and darkness and tempest, the sound of a trumpet and the voice of words, so that those who heard it begged that the words should not be spoken to them anymore. For they could not endure what was commanded. And if so much as a beast touches the mountain, it shall be stoned or shot with an arrow." That's where I started in Exodus. "And so terrifying was the sight that Moses said," now this adds a little bit extra, Moses said, "I am exceedingly afraid and trembling." Think about this. Moses was the one who had been talking to God face to face, and when God didn't even show his full power and might and glory, but just gave him a taste, Moses was afraid. Now, when you become familiar with somebody, what's normally the first thing that goes away? Fear. You can get a little comfortable. Moses maybe had gotten a little comfortable, but not after this. So even Moses said he was exceedingly afraid and trembling. It says, "But you have come to Mount Zion, to the city of the living God." See, this is talking about you and I, right? The pivotal moment for Israel was at Mount Sinai, but for us, it's now. It says, "The heavenly Jerusalem, to an innumerable company of angels, to the general assembly and the church of the firstborn who are registered in heaven, to God, the judge of all, to the spirits of just men made perfect, to Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant." Of course, Mount Sinai was the old covenant, but Jesus came to mediate the new covenant, "and to the blood of the sprinkling that speaks better things than that of Abel. See that you do not refuse him who speaks. For if they did not escape who refused him who spoke on earth, much more shall we not escape if we turn away from him who speaks from heaven, whose voice then shook the earth. But now he has promised, saying, 'Yet once more I shall not only shake the earth, but also heaven.' Now this 'yet once more' indicates the removal of things that are being shaken." Right? As was talked about, the earth groans for what's happening. And here the writer of Hebrews is saying God's going to shake the earth. He's going to shake the earth, and it's going to remove all of these things that he doesn't want to be there. It says, things that are being shaken, as of things that are made, that the things which cannot be shaken may remain. And what does it say cannot be shaken? "Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us have grace by which we may serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear, for our God is a consuming fire." Now again, this isn't explicit, but it's implicit. So if we are receiving a kingdom, who is the king? Christ. There has to be a king, right? If there's a kingdom, there has to be a king. And so here, the writer of Hebrews is saying and tying very directly to Mount Sinai, this announcement of a kingdom that cannot be shaken. Now, of course, we know the kingdom of Israel was shaken many times. It was shaken and broken apart and defeated and brought back again. But it is not this unshakable kingdom. What is this unshakable kingdom? It's the kingdom that's to come. It's the kingdom that we look forward to. So we walk through the commandment to celebrate this day, this day, and it's a celebration. Right? It's supposed to be a celebration. I'm giving a lot of homework today, but go reread Nehemiah 8 if you have any doubt that we are to celebrate this day. This is a day of celebration because it's a reminder, not just of what happened, but what's to come. It's a reminder that Christ declared himself king. We are to remember that. You know, if we ever lose hope, we go back. We take that memento that God has given us in this day and remind ourselves that Christ is the king, that he's in charge. Doesn't look like he's in charge sometimes, but he is. He knows what he's doing. He's fitting the pieces together. And then there will come a time when he shakes the earth mightily, and all that's left, everything that can be shaken will be gone, as it says here. All that will be left is his kingdom, his kingdom. And we know for that to happen, it has to come with his return, his return. And so this day that we are to remember not only points us to the past, but points us to the future, the day when Christ will declare his kingship, not just to the children of Israel, which he did at Mount Sinai, not that he did to his people through the new covenant, but declare his kingship to the whole world. And there'll be no doubt. Or Revelations 11, verse 15, then the seventh angel sounded, and there were loud voices. Now remember, teruah, it doesn't mean just trumpets. It doesn't just mean shofars. It just is a loud noise. You know, how much louder is there going to be when there's a loud voice in heaven saying, the kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of our Lord and his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever, right? Which was given in the first message. Revelations 19, verse 1, after these things I heard a loud voice of the great multitude in heaven saying, Alleluia, salvation and glory and honor and power belong to the Lord our God. Right? Remember, teruah, as I said, is associated with the shofar, but is really focused on loud noises, both for joy and for alarm. And in this declaration, there will be joy and alarm. Right? You'll have the multitudes in heaven that are exceedingly joyful because Christ is returning. Christ is gonna fix everything that's broken, and yet there's gonna be alarm on this earth. Right? There's gonna be alarm on this earth because all it has gone through, and people are gonna look and think that this is a declaration of war, which it is, and they're gonna fight against Christ. But after these loud noises, after these sounds, what happens? The king appears. Now I saw heaven open, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on him was called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he judges and makes war. His eyes were like a flame of fire, and on his head were many crowns. You know, if you think Moses, who had spoken face to face with God, yet trembled at the sight of God at Mount Sinai, how much more will the people tremble when they see a being coming with his eyes like a flame of fire, his head with many crowns, these loud noises, these shouts. And it says that he had a name written, what no one knew except himself. He was clothed in a robe dipped in blood, and his name is called the Word of God. And the armies in heaven, clothed in fine linen, white and clean, followed him on white horses. You know, Mount Sinai, 3 million people trembled at the sound, trembled at the sights that were happening. How much more when we see Christ in his full glory with his full army coming behind him. And it says, now out of his mouth goes a sharp sword, that with it he shall strike the nations. You know, it is a time of joy, but it is a time of alarm. God is saying no more. The time has come. I'm coming back, and I'm going to not just claim what is already mine. I'm going to make it happen. I'm going to change everything. and the world will be different. And he himself will rule them with a rod of iron, and he himself treads the winepress of the fierceness of the wrath of the Almighty God. And he has on his robes and on his thigh a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Right? And from then on, there will be no doubt who reigns. No one will be confused about who is in charge. It is Christ, Jesus Christ, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So may we remember on this day, may we use this day as a memento. And every day that we have blessed with this this Feast of Trumpets, this blowing of trumpets, that declares both Christ having declared himself king to his people, but this coming day when he declares himself King of Kings and Lord of Lords. May God speed that day.